So, Jonathan, there was a woman who told NBC she sees these texts as a scare tactic, but that it's working. I've seen videos of people on social media, people who did not get texts, but who are breaking down in tears, who are talking, as the woman whose sound we played, are thinking about how they are going to explain what's going on to their kids. Tell me what's going on here as you see it.
Well, you know, on election night on PBS, after it became clear that Donald Trump was on his way to the presidency, that I said that I was concerned on multiple levels. And the first level I said was I was concerned as an African American. And I was concerned as an African American because of the rhetoric used by Donald Trump on the campaign trail, saying that he wanted to let police have a day, some sort of day of rage where they can get the crime situation under control in various cities. Well, the dog whistle there is that he's going to go after black people, and so. To see that these text messages were going out the day after he becomes president-elect just feeds into the fear and concern that a lot of African Americans have about what is to come. And Chris, what is especially pernicious about this text messaging campaign is that some messages just said something like greetings. Other messages said greetings and the person's name. And so how did they get the person's name? How did they get the person's cell phone number? Where did they get this information to target specific people and now target specific people in multiple states across the country? You know, I know we're in this moment where we're trying to come to grips with what just happened. But I don't think anyone, particularly in those of us in our profession, and I'm not saying that we're doing that here, I'm just, doing a shot across the bow to others, to not downplay the concern and the legitimate fears, particularly people of color and especially black people have as a result of the election of Donald Trump to another term in the White House.
And I want to go back, Charles, to what he said about the ubiquitousness of information that's out there. But I was struck by the fact that so many of the recipients were young, that they were college students, high school students, middle school students, who, before their parents would ever want to, may have to sit down and have a very serious conversation. But from a legal standpoint and the search that's going on for who might be behind this, does that tell us anything about the type of person, the group that might do this, or is this just what horrible people do and how they think they can get it out there?
Well, certainly, Chris, there is a profile of a person who is a horrible person who engages in this sort of behavior, a white supremacist, someone who is on the far right. But make no mistake about it, regardless of the illegality of this, and the FBI has the tools necessary to make those assessments and to identify and characterize who they need to in order to do their investigations. There was one thing that you said in your read-in that I had a problem with, and it was the characterization of this as shocking. It's disappointing, it's upsetting, but it's not shocking. And the reason why these individuals who have been targeted are oftentimes younger is because the people who are sending these messages want to send a very clear message as early as possible so that folks understand where we are going and what this is. And as we have this conversation, it's incredibly important that we realize that for those people who are expressing a little bit of hesitancy, a little bit of reticence, a little bit of unsurety around whether they are going to continue to be in lockstep around our coalitions, this is why. Because this is a real fear. And as Jonathan talked about, this cannot be put in the same breath as wondering whether you'll be ostracized for people not knowing how you voted. No, this is a safety issue that black people in America are not going to be able to escape. And so it is a false equivalency for us to say at this point, we should all just come together and be able to move forward.
Take a breath.
Right, because this is something that is affecting us, our children, our families, our livelihoods in ways that other people simply cannot understand.
And Patrice, the president of your organization, CEO Derek Johnson, condemned these texts, but he also said something, I think, kind of to Charles' point, These actions are not normal, and we should refuse to let them be normalized. Talk about that and what can be done about it. I feel like every time I have you on, every time I have somebody from the NAACP, every time I have Charles on, because we talk a lot about civil rights cases, I'm asking this question: what do we do about it? And here we are again.
Well, Chris, thank you for having me on. And this is a critical point that leadership and the tone is very important. Elections have consequences, and the president-elect's campaign was built on hate and grievance, which has contributed to an environment of hate, racial hatred, and racial terror that the NAACP has seen since its inception in 1909. As Mr. Coleman has indicated, there is a great deal of empowerment and joy among young Black Americans, and these messages are meant to tamp that down. But their proliferation is the evidence that when you don't denounce hatred and you actually promote it, there are consequences for fellow American citizens. These text messages are disturbing, but they are only beginning. We saw this going back from the enactment of the 14th Amendment and the rise of Jim Crow and the rise of racial terror. This is simply the latest iteration of that strategy.
Jonathan, one mother whose daughter received one of these texts told your paper, and it's really to Charles' point, she said, "I'm disappointed, but I'm not shocked." Is this a new world for Black Americans or a continuation? I guess maybe the better question is this a continuation or an escalation of the world that Black Americans were already living in? And I should say by that, I've also had other people of color reach out to me and say that they have also had the same kind of reaction given where we are right now in this moment.
It is a continuation. And I think a lot of the fear, especially as a result of these text messages, is this the beginning of an escalation? I mean, there was a reason why people were in the streets 4 years ago after the murder of George Floyd. But George Floyd was not the first person killed by first Black person killed by law enforcement, unarmed Black person killed by law enforcement. People had been marching in the streets for generations. What's concerning here is we don't seem to learn the lessons. And by we, the American people, don't seem to learn the lessons of the past. And when we, meaning Black people, talk about our concerns, talk about, fill in the blank person who has just been killed by law enforcement, just been killed by a vigilante, set upon by white supremacists, that suddenly when we ask for our leaders and ask for our government to take our lives seriously, suddenly it's, you're catering to the far left, that you are not paying attention to other issues, when all we're asking you is can you pay attention to our dignity? Can you pay attention to our lives? We are very much a part of the American fabric. And so when we say to you, we don't think it's right that law enforcement has done this to George Floyd, that you take what we're saying seriously, especially since we have been saying the same thing for generations. Ms. Freeman, who is the woman you showed at the beginning of this segment, that conversation she had to have with her child as a result of getting those text messages, that's the conversation that parents have been having with their Black parents have been having with their children for generations. Unfortunately, because of text messaging and social media, she wasn't able to have that conversation on her timetable, painful timetable. She had to have that conversation because someone decided to weaponize her child's identity.
And we know, as you said, that information is out there on all of us, but it's not hard to find out details of a person. Charles, is this a hate crime?
It is, unquestionably. And I think that one of the things, I don't use this word very often, Chris, but the notion of being terrified. As a civil rights attorney, I am terrified when I think about where we are right now, meaning that this is November. By January, there will be a new attorney general and there will be a new person heading the DOJ's Office of Civil Rights. Kristen Clarke will no longer be there to do the amazing job that she's done. This investigation, wherever it goes, will likely end there. And then what happens? What happens to the people who are responsible for perpetrating these wrongs? What happens to the other people who feel emboldened at that point? Because we can almost guarantee that under a Donald Trump DOJ, whomever he decides will be the AG, the level of attention that is paid to civil rights cases will not be what it was under this past administration. And that is what terrifies me, because there will be no guardrail, there will be no stop. There will be no legal repercussions to even stop these actions as they have been identified as illegal and as hate crimes. And that's deeply problematic and something we have to stay keeping our eyes on.
So, Patrice, you worked on the Hill and you worked in the executive branch for decades. Do you have confidence in the system working in a case like this at this moment in time?
Well, I think that during the past few years, we have seen that public officials and the American people have really shored up our democracy. I do have faith that the American people are good people. I do have faith that there is a dedicated group of public officials that are more interested in multiracial democracy and in protecting the rights of Americans, all Americans. But I think that when racial hate is used as a political tool and not denounced, it erodes democracy and it creates danger. So it's going to be up to everyone who believes in democracy to shore it up and call out hate wherever it is. And we are calling on this administration to denounce the hate and grievance that they ran on, and to really promote healing and to tamp down on all of that hateful rhetoric.